Please welcome to the stage our co-chair for the Summit Countering Antisemitism, Michael Greenwald, who will have a virtual fireside chat with the Presidential Special Envoy to the Middle East, Morgan Ortagus. Welcome, Morgan.
Hey, Morgan.
Hello.
So, Morgan, thank you so much for joining us today. Full disclosure, Morgan and I are very dear friends. We work together at the Treasury Department to tackle terrorist financing, and it doesn't surprise me that in every stage of Morgan's career, all she does is tackle, and all she does is disrupt hate. And Morgan, I really appreciate you joining us today. I wanted to start with, perhaps you could share about your personal journey converting to Judaism when you were serving with the U.S. Treasury in Saudi Arabia.
Happy to. Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, and to everybody at the synagogue for having me. I wish I could be there. I just left the Situation Room in the White House. We are working very diligently, putting your taxpayer dollars to good use, and working to bring every hostage home that we can. It's been a daunting few weeks, but my boss, Steve Witkoff, and of course, President Trump, there's nothing, I think, of greater importance to them than to make sure that we get every hostage home. Steve saw a lot of hostage families last night, and we took some to dinner 2 nights ago. So it is at the forefront of everything we do. It is the motivating factor behind what we're doing. But just to back it way on back, as Michael was talking about, I was living in D.C. I had been in Iraq, and then came back from Iraq, and was dating my now husband at the time, and started taking Intro to Judaism class at the JCC. And then I started working with a rabbi here in Washington. And I learned that the Treasury Department was going to send me to Saudi Arabia. So I thought, I don't know, I can't turn down this job. It's too big of a job. So how are we going to do this? So I think it was 2010, which was before, social media was as big as it was. But I actually spent every Friday for a year, a solid year, every Friday afternoon, Friday morning in the U.S., Skyping with my rabbi, who was from Adas, Israel, in D.C. at the time. And we did our lessons, and we found ways. We hosted a Passover Seder. We did Shabbat. We had a big Hanukkah party in the diplomatic quarter. This is all in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A very different Saudi Arabia, excuse me, than it is now. And then, of course, my apologies. It's dry here with the heat on. I wish in Palm Beach, but. So we did that, and of course, I ended up doing my Bet Din and Mikvah back in the U.S., but did all of my courses through Skype in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh for a year. So I joked at my Bet Din that I had to be the first social media converter at the time. This was 2010, and certainly the first convert from Saudi Arabia in probably a very long time. Right. But even before that, when I was in Baghdad, I spent my first Hanukkah. Actually, the first Hanukkah I ever celebrated was in Saddam's palace in Baghdad, because that was still our embassy at the time. So I've had an interesting path towards Judaism, which probably explains why all these years later I'm the Deputy Special Envoy to the Middle East.
Well, that's exactly right. I had you tell that because it's important context to you being, helping lead this efforts and really trying to heed this call to action. So I guess to fast forward, you were part of the team for the first Abraham Accords. You are now, approaching, post-October 7th, not just with the hostages, but negotiating around the world and using U.S. leverage at every part of your disposal. What are some of the lessons you learned from the first negotiations of the Abraham Accords that you are now taking into your new role with Steve?
So it's interesting, when being a part of the Abraham Accords was sort of like winning a Super Bowl in diplomacy, right? Or even you rarely get these sort of diplomatic accomplishments. It was a massive honor. I played a small part on that team, but worked very closely with Secretary Pompeo, who I was his spokesperson at the time, Jared Kushner, and the whole team. And I have some really beautiful and amazing memories of being pregnant with my daughter, Adina, who is now 4.5, in the Oval Office as the president was making the first phone calls between himself and Prime Minister Netanyahu and the leaders of UAE and Bahrain, and later Morocco and Sudan. And just an amazing moment. So it's kind of like lightning striking twice in the same place to try and get to repeat Abraham Accords and get more countries in there. But I'm hopeful. I think that I don't know that it's going to happen, immediately. I think what precipitated Abraham Accords was our maximum economic pressure campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran. That also included us taking out Qasem Soleimani. And it's a very simple equation for us in the Middle East. Whenever you reward your friends and your allies and punish your enemies, then that tends to have good ramifications. I think if you look at the past 20 years of our Middle East policy, anytime we've emboldened the Islamic Republic of Iran with funds, they don't use those funds. They don't use sanctions relief in order to build roads or improve their public health infrastructure, to build new schools. It goes to their terror proxy regimes. It goes to their nuclear weapons capacity and building, and it goes obviously towards the advancements of ballistic missiles, of their sophisticated killer drones. So they just don't use sanctions relief ever for their people. And anytime that you're not pressuring them, anytime you take, and we've seen this in both the second term of Obama and during the Biden administration, anytime you take your heel off of their neck, they use it as a way to act out and to foment chaos in the region. And that started, of course, in the Biden term. After years of getting sanctions relief, then we saw October 7th, what happened on October 8th, Hezbollah, right? Hezbollah started launching at Israel right away. So we know full well in order to get back into a place where we're doing Abraham Accords or peace deals again, it starts with the head of the snake. And the head of the snake is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that's why President Trump went in the early weeks of his presidency, and we're still only in month 2. But one of the first things he did was to redesignate the Houthis as a foreign FTO, a foreign terrorist organization, and of course to reinstate the maximum economic pressure campaign against Iran, which we're in right now, and we'll see where that leads.
Right. You were just in Lebanon, Morgan, and can you share a little bit about your experience there, given your time in the region? What was it like in your new role? The plane comes down in Lebanon, you're getting off, you're about to go into those meetings. You know that you have a different kind of leverage going into those negotiations. Also, being a mom now, and given the just disgusting events of the last couple of weeks, how do you prepare for those conversations personally and professionally?
Sure. That's such an interesting question, Michael. I will say that I was in the last Trump administration, and you feel a lot of pressure and weight. When I was spokesperson of the State Department, you feel a lot of pressure when you're speaking on behalf of the President of the United States and the Secretary of State. Then, of course, in the past 4 years, I've been in business. I've been back in the military. I'm a Navy Reserve intel officer. But it's very different when the president hands you the football and asks you to represent not only him, but to represent your country. And definitely, Michael, landing in Lebanon, I was feeling the weight and the gravity of that and the awesome responsibility that you have whenever you represent your country. In the first few days of the Trump administration, the ceasefire, in the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon that was negotiated in November of 24, there was a 60-day window in which Israel was supposed to pull out of southern Lebanon in its entirety. That was expiring like 4 days into the Trump administration. We knew the Israelis needed an extension, so we had to negotiate that extension on the phone with the new president of Lebanon, President Aoun. And it was just a very, it was a really big, tough negotiation. It wasn't easy to do on the phone, but we had to do so. So I went out to Lebanon. At the time when I landed, they had a prime minister designate, but they had not formed their government. They actually had not formed a government in 2.5 years. So the purpose for me going was, number one, to encourage them, the new president, Aoun, who's fantastic, and the new prime minister, like, you guys got to get your government together. And not only do you have to get your government together, Hezbollah cannot be in the government. Hezbollah cannot be, just like President Trump has said emphatically, that Hamas will not rule and will not govern Gaza. We felt just as strongly and passionately that Hezbollah could not govern Lebanon, and nobody wanted to rebuild. This goes for the Saudis, the Gulfi, the Emiratis, anybody. Nobody wanted to rebuild a Lebanese state that would just go to benefit Hezbollah, which, Israel severely degraded, especially their leadership by taking out Nasrallah, their number two, and others. So, I actually think, and I think the Israelis would echo this. I work very closely with Minister Ron Dermer. We think that there's a small window of opportunity here to actually keep Hezbollah out of the government, to prevent them reconstituting, to prevent them from taking over the South again. Nobody's Pollyanna about it. We know this is going to be incredibly difficult, but Michael, you've done this for a long time. The biggest thing that we have to stop and prevent is from Hezbollah being able to smuggle cash into the country and from being able to pay their fighters and rebuilding southern Lebanon. So that's something that we're incredibly focused on right now.
So this event is about action and not admiration. And so you have been a leader in your local community, you've been a leader in this country, you've been a leader globally, but what would be your advice to this community and to other communities in the U.S. and globally to heed that call to action? What do you think we need to do to be disruptive in a coordinated fashion like no other before? Because I just think, Morgan, that if we don't, it's just going to keep happening. And
Sure.
And so I was just curious, if you knew tomorrow you couldn't fail, and everybody in this audience knew they couldn't fail on the steps they would take, what would you recommend?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head that everything starts with your local community. So how are you reaching out to churches, if there are mosques, if there are, interfaith centers, reaching out to people, because it's really easy for people to sort of think or say anti-Semitic things, but when they meet us and they realize that, we are wives and mothers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles and that we want the same thing for our country and our community. I think it really starts by building dialogue at the local level and I know the reputation of this temple and how involved you are in the community in Palm Beach, and I would encourage to put that on steroids. I do think coming to Washington helps. I think speaking to your representatives, I think having your voice be heard at rallies, at forums, at speeches. I don't know how much social media helps. I think it's important. I mean, for me, I kind of stay off social media these days because it just sort of feels like, yelling in the wind a bit. But, if you want to be involved and active on social media, that's fine. But I think do it from a place of being constructive and do it from a place of building bridges. I mean, listen, that's what I do in diplomacy, Michael. I'm getting people in the room together that have been formerly have been enemies, and I'm getting them to build trust. I mean, I can't really go into what I'm doing right now, but that's absolutely what we're doing in the Middle East and around the world. It's no different. What I do in diplomacy, when I get nations together behind the scenes to start building relationship and thinking about how we can move to a more peaceful place, is what I suggest you do in your community. So, where are I think that you're very lucky to live in the free state of Florida. I think I'm like a fifth generation Floridian, actually. I don't live in Florida anymore. I miss it. I need to move back, but I'd have to count. But I think I'm at least 5 generations of a Floridian. And so I think you're really, you're lucky to be in a state that I think is very protective of the Jewish community. But I would say, in your community, if you come to DC, how can you build bridges? How can you get in a room? I mean, listen, it's really easy. I said this, and, this is something that I always lead with when I'm talking. My daughter, Adina, is Jewish, but my twin sister married a Muslim American, and they basically adopted a war-torn refugee from Afghanistan. They got her when she said she was 14. Maybe she was. I think she might have been a little younger when she came, but while my sister's husband nor the daughter are religious, they still are Muslim. And she's a literal war-torn refugee, ended up in firefights on the way out of getting smuggled out of Afghanistan. Crazy story. And so when I think of the Bibas children and how infuriating it was what happened to them, I mean, I found out about it obviously before the general public did, and I didn't sleep for days over it. And every time I meet with these hostage families, I think you're living my worst nightmare as a mother, right? The worst possible scenario as a Jewish mother that I can think of is what these hostage families are enduring. But then I remember, because of Hamas, because of Iran, there are mothers, on the other side, on the Palestinian side, that are also experiencing, their children being killed. And I don't want to ever be immune to that, right? I don't want to ever forget that there is so much suffering, and ultimately we have to destroy Hamas. They cannot control and govern Gaza. But I think don't let your heart get immune to the suffering that happens on both sides. Suffering is absolutely the fault of Hamas. It is the responsibility of Hamas, but it's still suffering nonetheless. So when I'm trying to bring Israelis and Arabs together, I always lead with this and tell the story. Don't forget, in my own family, right, I have Jews, I have a Jewish daughter, I have a Muslim niece, and protecting all of them is of utmost importance to me.
No, thank you for sharing that. I would say, to close, Morgan, speaking of your daughter, Adina, in this moment, how are you talking to Adina about October 7th? How are you talking to her about anti-Semitism? And all of us in this room, as we talk to our families and to our loved ones and to our children who really are going to be going on to campuses, going on to different laboratories, hopefully, of innovation for the U.S., how should we be talking to our children to change the tide? And just walk us through how you as a mother have that conversation, and how mothers and fathers in this room should be having that conversation. My daughter's only 4, so I haven't spoken to her about it. I think she's too little to process it. So I think there's a lot of moms and grandparents in this room that probably have a lot of wisdom to impart to me on how I handle this. I did tell somebody the other day, it's tough to even think about this question, Michael. When they remember early in the war, they had taken some little girls that we ended up getting out. I think it was in maybe with the first hostage release, we ended up getting those little girls out, and it was just gut wrenching because they were around the same age as Adina. But I remember we were at an airport somewhere, and my daughter goes to a Chabad Montessori preschool, so she's learning all the Hebrew songs, and she was singing a Torah song or something in the airport loudly. We travel with her a lot, and I remember because she was singing in Hebrew, and she was a little kid, so she was singing loudly, and I remember that I looked around nervously, around where we were standing, to think, who's listening to my kid sing in Hebrew, because your immediate impulse is to be protective. And it made me incredibly sad that we were in America, and that was my response, to be nervous, right? To be on edge about my daughter singing, in Hebrew at the airport. And I don't want it to be that way in this country. So I'm so grateful for the allies and the people who stand up for us. And I think, for me, Michael, it's just made me bolder. A lot of people think when I went to Lebanon, there's a pretty infamous picture now of me shaking hands with the president with the Star of David ring that I had on, which I wear almost all the time. I don't even think about it. My husband bought it for me after October 7th, and I just instinctively normally put it on. I wasn't trying to make a political statement that day, but I ended up making one. But I think it's incredibly important that we're not timid, that we're not fearful of showing who we are, of showing our faith, of being proud about it, and not being intimidated by who we are. So I don't know how I'm going to explain all of this to Adina one day. It's very difficult to think
that I'm going to have to explain to her that people are going to hate her simply because of her faith and who she is. But that's just something that I think we struggle with in every generation of Jews. But I deal with it personally by always wearing Jewish symbols and by being proud. And I'm not going to be intimidated or scared or threatened or shamed out of wearing them. I'm going to wear them. And I think this is why we just, it's good probably to have some converts come in. We bring some new stuff to the gene pool, and we bring a little bit of
yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And Morgan, you're an inspiration. I sleep better, and I know many in this room sleep better at night knowing that you are fighting on behalf of this country, and working so diligently with the team to counter this globally. And so I know Rabbi Shiner looks forward to welcoming you to Palm Beach Synagogue in person, in the future, and you can share an update on everything you're doing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.